All right, in this video, I want to share something interesting with you. And I don't know if you'll find it controversial or not, but it's something I think about here and there. And I was thinking about it this morning because last night before I went to bed, I watched a video about some pagan views on some certain things. It was just a video that caught my eye. I decided to check it out. And there was a lot of rehashing and bringing up stuff that I've looked into before. But the stuff that it was talking about got me to think of this. At least this morning it got me to think about it. Good thing I didn't do it last night. I probably wouldn't be able to sleep too well. I would want to do this video. But what I want to talk about is how naturally born into this world and you give into sin, there's something that happens. You solidify yourself as a child of Satan, and you're bound to him. And in another metaphor, it's as if he becomes your husband, right? And since this is what happens, you are under Satan as both your father and your husband. You're under his law, under his rules. And he has these laws and rules set up because they are good rules, but he knows that you're not able to actually keep them. And since you're not able to keep them, he can then devour you. And that would be your punishment, is to be devoured, because Satan is known by many names throughout pagan religions. And one name that you may want to look into is from Amos, chapter 5. And it mentions the star of this pagan deity. I don't remember the name used in Amos, but in Acts chapter 7, when Stephen is wrapping up his rebuke to his fellow Jews, he tells them about how they made the star to Raphaim. So if you look up the name Raphaim and the name used in Amos chapter 5, and they talk about, you want to know what this star is, what is this star that they made in reference to this god? You'll notice that this god is Saturn, or Kronos. And he's supposed to be the god of time, a god of boundaries and limitations of law. And he is depicted in black, and that's why you have the judges wear black. It has to do with law and restriction, right? And they give you sentencing, like your time under punishment, how much time you have to pay off a fine, right? It bounds up time in different ways. Always have Satan depicted as giving contracts where he binds up the future that hasn't even come yet by you making a deal, so that the future, you give it to him by binding it into a contract, right? It's all, it has all these things having to do with time and boundaries and law. And this Saturn Kronos figure is always depicted as devouring his own children, right? And that's basically what he does, right? He devours his wife, he devours his children, because he's basically just this black hole, right? You got all these depictions of a black hole. Saturn, its color is depicted as black because it's a black hole. It can never be satisfied, just constantly devouring, never satisfied. He's the destroyer, death and hell, never full, never satisfied, always wanting more, right? Always hungry. And it's interesting because when you come to the Garden of Eden, what does Satan do? He tries to get Adam and Eve to partake of the tree of what? The knowledge of good and evil. What is the knowledge of good and evil? The law. See how he tries to get them to partake of the law. To be under the law. And biblical scholars and pastors and everybody teaches that when Adam and Eve gave into sin, they basically gave legal right to this Satan fella to then have control, right? Because it's all about time and boundaries. And when they partook of the law, it was like a contract where Adam and Eve were given dominion over the earth by God. They basically ended up giving that over to Satan, right? And that's why as soon as you sin, when you're aware of what sin is, and you still choose it, you choose evil over good, you've given yourself over to Satan. And that's why you need to be saved, because now he's going to devour you. He's going to devour your physical life, and then he's going to devour your soul in hell. And we see this in the scriptures where Paul talks about the law not being under the law. And I know a lot of you may be saying, but God gave us the law at Mount Sinai. No, we were given it at the Garden of Eden. What Moses gives, he gives a law that was already established. Not that everybody was following it and used it, but he gave a law that is the law of this world. You remember Paul saying that he went to the third heaven and he said that he heard things that are not lawful to utter, right? It reminds me of something I read in I forgot what word I should use here, but it's a book outside of the scriptures. It's the Gospel of Thomas. I read it before, and Thomas mentions a time where Jesus took him aside and told him something, and the other disciples asked him, Thomas, hey, what did he tell you? And he said, if I told you, you would immediately pick up stones and stone me. And it reminded me of what Paul said about going up and hearing things that, shouldn't be uttered. It's because here we're under a law, right? So we're under restriction. And he plays it off as if we're being set free, but it's not the case, right? It's actually the opposite. We're enslaved, and we're enslaved to the law. And when God comes and gives the law through Moses, he actually offers up remedy, right? How do you actually remedy the issue? You're bound to the law, right? You're contracted to it. You can't just walk away from it, right? Well, God shows us sacrifice. He shows us the priesthood. He shows us the temple, showing us what is going on in heaven, what God is doing to save us, to set us free from the law to the God of this world, to our husband, to our father, right? And that's what I want to talk about here, right? Starting off with the first two verses you see here highlighted, Romans 6, it says, what shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? Know ye not that so many of us, as were baptized into Jesus Christ, were baptized into his death? Therefore we are buried with him by baptism into death, that like as Christ was raised up from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life. I'm bringing up this first because you see how Paul is saying that when Jesus Christ died, it allowed us a way to die. Now, when there is a deal made, a contract made, such as a marriage, right? That's only binding while you are both alive. It's until death do you part. So when you die, you're set free from the marriage and the law and the vows you've made, right? So if you're have a contract with Satan because of sin, right, where he is your God now, he is your father, he is your husband, You're bound to his law whether you like it or not. It's up to him whether or not he lets you go or not. You don't get to decide. Well, Jesus gives you a way where you can die and be set free from all that, right? So that's why we're told in the very next chapter, at verse 1, Paul says, "Know ye not, brethren, for I speak to them that know the law," right? He wants to make sure you understand the law here, the Old Testament, the Torah, right? He says, "How that the law hath dominion over a man as long as he liveth," right? As long as you're alive, the law has dominion over you. It controls you. It dictates what you can and cannot do, and if you receive punishment or not, right? Continuing, he says, "For the woman which hath an husband is bound by the law to her husband so long as he liveth. But if the husband be dead, she is loosed from the law of her husband." All right? And it's another thing you need to take into consideration. Jesus' sacrifice actually put Satan to death. You see, the cross was put in a place called Golgotha, the place of the skull. And the cross, when it's put into the ground, it looks like a sword stabbed into the ground. So when Jesus is up there on the cross and he is being put to death, you can see that God is taking his word, Jesus Christ, the sword of the Spirit, and stabbing it into the head, the skull of death, Satan, Saturn. And he is defeating the enemy, as we are told that the prophecy of the seed of the woman, that Satan will bruise his heel, but he will bruise his head. We see that happen at the cross, right? So not only did Jesus die and give us a way where we can die, he put Satan to death, right? So continuing here, "So then if, while her husband liveth, she be married to another man, she shall be called an adulteress. But if her husband be dead, she is free from that law, so that she is no adulteress, though she be married to another man. Wherefore, my brethren, ye also are become dead to the law by the body of Christ, that ye should be married to another, even to him who is raised from the dead, that we should bring forth fruit unto God. For when we were in the flesh, the motions of sins which were by the law did work in our members to bring forth fruit unto death. But now we are delivered from the law, that being dead wherein we were held, that we should serve in newness of spirit, and not in the oldness of the letter." You see, in the Garden of Eden, what were we told about Adam and Eve? They were naked and not ashamed because they were clothed in God's righteousness. They were walking by faith, not by sight. When they went to the law, they were trying to establish their own righteousness, right? It's like they committed adultery on God, right? And now they have their own righteousness, which was fig leaves, which faded away, and they had to keep replacing it. So then, in order to set them free, Jesus had to come into this world and sacrifice himself to take out Satan so that we can die through him, and then we can raise in Jesus' life, being joined to him in marriage, where he is now our husband, and we are born again, and he is now our father. So we were set free from the law of this world, right? That's why we are told, I want to say Philippians, but we're going to do a search here. I think it's Galatians 4. So let's go to that real quick. We'll do a search if it's not right here. Okay, yes, right here. So Galatians 4, he says, "Now I say that the heir, as long as he is a child, differeth nothing from a servant, though he be Lord of all, but is under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the Father. Even so we, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world." And this elements of the world, he's referring to as the law, as he continues. "But when the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons." So you see that we were in bondage under the elements of the world. So he sent someone under the elements of the world, which is the law, to redeem us that were under the law, that we might receive the adoptions of sons, right? And if you have done this, that's when you become a child of God, when you have died and become born again, right? So you're now no longer under the law. So all these Christians who want to follow the law, they are unwittingly actually following Satan. And that's why Jesus talks to these Pharisees and calls them a generation of vipers, children of their father Satan. And they were gung-ho people after the law, and to keep the law, and wanting everybody to keep the law, and condemned everybody who didn't and weren't as good as them, right? And an interesting thing that happened that you might want to look into is when Jesus was crucified and there was an earthquake and the temple had the veil between the most holy and the holy place was ripped. You see, in the temple, you could go to the holy place, but you couldn't go into the most holy place where the Ark of the Covenant was, where you could go before God. Only the high priest could go into that place once a year, and that was on the Feast of Atonement. And if you went in on the wrong time, which they did apparently often, that high priest would die because he didn't go in at that time he was supposed to go in. And at that time when the temple veil was ripped, a truth was revealed to everybody, right? A truth was revealed to everybody because they didn't have the Ark of the Covenant. Matter of fact, what's interesting, if you look up what Ron Wyatt has found, they found the Ark of the Covenant under the place of the skull, Golgotha, when Jesus was crucified. So when he was crucified and his blood was dripping down and there was an earthquake, his blood would have poured out and went down onto the ark, onto the mercy seat, where the high priest is supposed to bring the blood of the sacrifice on atonement to sprinkle on the Ark of the Covenant, on the mercy seat, for the remission of sins. So we see that Jesus did that. And when the veil was ripped in the temple, guess what everybody saw in the temple? They didn't see the Ark of the Covenant. They saw the black cube. And this is why Stephen, before he was stoned, said, "You made a star to Raphaim, Saturn," because the cube represents the star of Saturn. On the planet Saturn, you go look it up, it has a hexagon shape on one of its poles. And the hexagon shape is a depiction of a cube. Like if you turn like a die, if you have some dice and you grab one of them, you turn it to the up a little bit, it makes a hexagon shape. Like if you draw yourself a cube on a piece of paper, like you try to make a three-dimensional cube there, you'll end up having hexagon shape. And that makes a six-pointed star, and that's the star Israel is using. They're using the star of Raphaim, the star of Saturn, or Satan, because they're under the law, and they want to impose Noahide law on the rest of the world, because it's all about time, law, and control. And it has to do with worshiping the god of this world, Satan. And that's why they're all going so gung-ho after Donald Trump, because he worships Apollyon, Abaddon, the destroyer. And that's the name he's coming in, right? And they're worshiping the same deity. Whether they know it or not, or accept it as Satan or not, that's how it's all playing out. And I think that just about wraps up everything I wanted to say here. I guess I'll bring one more thing. Let's go over to 2 Corinthians chapter 3. I know this is going to tick off, especially the Seventh-day Adventists. But in 2 Corinthians chapter 3 at verse 6 it says, talking about God as the who, so God also hath made us able ministers of the New Testament, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life. When he's talking about the letter, he's talking about the letter of the law. And you're not under the law, you're under grace, the Spirit. Right? as he continues here at verse 7, but if the ministration of death, written and engraved in stones, was glorious, so that the children of Israel could not steadfastly behold the face of Moses for the glory of his countenance, which glory was to be done away, how shall not the ministration of the Spirit be rather glorious? For if the ministration of condemnation be glory, much more doth the ministration of righteousness exceed in glory. For even that which was made glorious had no glory in this respect, by reason of the glory that excelleth. For if that which was done away was glorious, much more that which remaineth is glorious. So you see how what was written and engraved in stones, the law, is the ministration of death and condemnation. But you have been set free from that. Right? Set free from it. And I guess we're going to go back to Galatians. We're wrapping up with this over here. Down here. We're told in Galatians 4 verse 21, tell me ye that desire to be under the law, do ye not hear the law? For it is written that Abraham had two sons, the one of a bondmaid, the other by a free woman. And you notice when Abraham, the first son, he had it with a woman that wasn't his wife, right? When God said, hey, you're going to bring forth a child at your old age, you should know that he's talking about with your wife, right? But instead, he has a child through his wife's handmaid, right? So you see how this was done in, you could say, sin, right? But he who was of the bondwoman was born after the flesh, right? Because they were trying to do it themselves. They weren't trusting in God, right? They were trying to bring about God's promise themselves, right? That's why it's born after the flesh. But he of the free woman was by promise. By promise is by faith. When somebody promises something, you have nothing other than faith in what they said, right? That's how you go by the Spirit. Which things are an allegory? For these are the two covenants, the one from Mount Sinai, which gendereth to bondage, which is Agar. For this Agar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and answereth to Jerusalem, which now is, and is in bondage with her children. But Jerusalem, which is above, is free, which is the mother of us all. For it is written, rejoice, thou barren that bearest not, break forth and cry, thou that travailest not. For the desolate hath many more children than she which hath an husband. Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are the children of promise. But as then he that was born after the flesh, the ones who were trying to keep the law and do everything themselves, right? Walking by sight, not by faith, trying to earn their salvation, trying to prove they're saved. They persecute him that was born after the Spirit, even so it is now. Nevertheless, what saith the Scripture? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman. So then, brethren, we are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free. And we know that it was Satan that has us in bondage. Let's come over here to Hebrews. I thought I was wrapping up, but I want to make more of a point here. I think it's Hebrews chapter 4. I might have to put a search here, where he talks about how we're set free from the one of has power of death. Hebrews 2:14. I went to 4:14. My bad. All right. Hebrews 2:14. For as much then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also himself likewise took part of the same, that through death he might destroy him that had the power of death, that is the devil. So you see how it's here, the devil has the power of death, right? Because time, right? All it takes is some time, and eventually you'll die. Verse 15, and deliver them who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. So you see here how Satan, the devil, uses the power of death to subject people to bondage, right? And people are bound by what? The law. You starting to see here where the law comes from, right? Is this becoming a little more clear to you? I hope so. Because we also read about, I'm trying to remember the passage here. We've got here how through the power of death, he has everybody subject to bondage. Is it over here? Let me take a quick look. I don't think this is the passage I'm looking for. Well, there is verse 14 of Colossians 2, blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to his cross. Right? Where he triumphed over the principalities and powers, the spiritual powers in this world that are what we really are fighting about. Fighting against, not flesh and blood, right? And then he goes on not to tell you not to worry about being judged about holy days, new moons, and Sabbath days, which have to do with the law, right? That they're just a shadow of things to come. But this is not what I wanted to actually look at. Let me see if this helps ring a bell. Let's come down to here to the New Testament. You see how in Galatians 5:1, when Paul is talking about being under the law, he's talking about it being bondage. Oh, I remember the verse now. I remember it. It's 1 Corinthians 15. Let's go to that. I knew if I just waited out, I'd figure it out. Right here. We know how Satan has the power of death, and he gets everybody into bondage, right? At verse 55 of 1 Corinthians 15, it says, "O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law." Because what? The wages of sin is death. So how does Satan have the power of death? Because of sin. What is sin? Well, we'll show you what sin is. 1 John, I think it's chapter 2. I'm going to have to put that in. I'm not sure if transgresseth, so I'm just going to put sin law. I think it's transgression of the law. Okay, it's chapter 3, verse 4. Whosoever committeth sin transgresseth also the law, for sin is transgression of the law. So you see how Satan has power of death is by sin, but the power of sin is from the law, because sin is transgression of the law. So you see how the law, we look at it as some good holy thing, and it's not necessarily evil, but it bounds us so that if we don't end up keeping it, we can't just trust in God and his righteousness to cover us. We are condemned now, right? But Jesus offers a way for us to break free from this, where we now walk by faith, not by sight, and we're no longer under Satan's law. He's no longer our father. He's no longer our husband. He's no longer our God. We are not under the law. And if you want to take this to go live in sin, you're going to have to deal with the consequences of that. But I mainly want to talk about in this video how gung-ho a lot of Christians are about the law. And it just shows who they're really following. All right? Because these people who were legalistic, they were going after Satan. They were children of Satan. They were considered vipers. Right? Let's look at that real quick. Matthew 3:7. But when he saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees come to his baptism, he said to them, O generation of vipers, who hath warned you to flee from the wrath to come? And this was actually John the Baptist telling him it. And then Jesus tells him in Matthew 12:34, O generation of vipers, how can ye, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh. And in Matthew 23, where Jesus is just talking about the Pharisees, pretty much that whole chapter, He says, ye serpents, ye generation of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell? Right? He's calling them snakes, and we know that the devil is the serpent from the beginning, right? And then he calls them the devil, their father. I don't remember quite where that is. Oh, John 8:44. Ye are of your father the devil, and the lust of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. Right? So, and in the context, he's talking to the Pharisees. You can go look that one up yourself there. So you see how he says that to these Pharisees, and check out what Paul says in Philippians chapter 3. He's boasting in the flesh, right? He says at verse 4, though I might also have confidence in the flesh, if any other man thinketh that he hath whereof he might trust in the flesh, I more, circumcised the 8th day of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, and Hebrew of the Hebrews, as touching the law, a Pharisee. So you see, he was a Pharisee, going hardcore after the law. But Jesus says, oh, they're children of Satan, a generation of vipers. He says, concerning the zeal persecuting the church, touching the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. Right? You see how he's going after the law. But then he says here at verse 7, but what things were gained to me, those I counted loss for Christ. Yea, doubtless I count all things but loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and do count them but dung, fecal matter, turds, that I may win Christ, and be found in him, not having mine own righteousness, which is of the law, but by that which is through the faith of Christ, the righteousness which is of God by faith. That's having God's imputed righteousness. So you're righteous even though you're not, because you have God's righteousness, which means you can't be condemned to hell. Right? Which is a beautiful thing. Praise God. Right? So, I think that wraps it up. I think I made this clear here. I've talked about this several times before, about walking after the flesh and walking after the spirit, how walking after the flesh is walking after the law, trying to establish your own righteousness. You're going by sight, not by faith. By walking by the spirit, as you're not trying to establish your own righteousness, you're actually accepting God's righteousness, and you're walking by faith, not by sight. And talked about the law and how the law actually came from Satan at the Garden of Eden, giving you the knowledge of good and evil, trying to make it seem as though you can be like God, which is exactly what he told Eve, right? You can be like God yourself, which is basically what everybody's doing when they partake of the law. They think they can establish their own righteousness and be good like God, that they can be like God and be justified and not deserve hell and earn heaven because they can be like God, keeping the law, and being like Satan from Isaiah 14, saying, I will be like the Most High, where you're trying to establish your own righteousness to make it sound as though you're good when only God is good, right? You see all this connection, and then I put it together with also what the Bible talks about the star of Rephaim, the star of Satan. You put all these things together, you get to see how the world is. You get to see how it affects your governments. It gets to see how it affects the churches. It's everywhere. This is Satan's world. And that's why we have what we have in this world. But with all that being said, this is it. Thank you for your time and attention. Don't forget to do what Isaiah said and seek out the book of the Lord and read it, putting line upon line like we were doing here. Studying the word. Showing yourselves approved unto God, not man, like Paul said, rightly dividing the word of truth, right? Dividing here between the law and grace, but going after the flesh, after the spirit, the God of this world from the true God, right? We did that here today, and to do what John says, and let's keep the word, let's preserve it, protect it, hide it in our hearts, so that God will keep us from the hour of temptation, which will come upon all those that dwell on the earth, and then Jesus will never be able to tell us we do err not knowing the scriptures. And if you like this video and the other content I put out there, please like, subscribe with the bell icon, share the video, share the channel, internet in the comment section. These things help out a lot, and if you're able to, there's 4 ways you can donate to the ministry in the info description box, but what would really help would be your prayers. If you pray that Jesus would get this message out to who it needs to get out to, that he would watch over this ministry to keep it going, and that he would protect all of us and provide for all of us until he comes and gets us, which looks like it's really soon. And with all that being said, thank you so much for watching. Take care. I'll see you in the next one. And may God bless you and yours.